They say every family has one moment that splits its story into before and after. For the Armstrongs, that moment began under the glow of crystal chandeliers, in a house that smelled like roses, roasted duck, and denial. The Armstrong family home sat in Old Haven, Connecticut, a century-old Victorian with ivy creeping along its brick spine and windows that had seen more arguments than storms. That evening it was dressed like a bride itself. White roses climbed the banisters, silverware gleamed across 12-place settings, and a string quartet played from the sunroom. It was Joanna Armstrong's engagement dinner, the golden daughter, the family's pride, the one who always knew how to be adored. Her older sister, Alexandra Armstrong, stood near the dining archway, nursing a half glass of Chardonnay she didn't want. She had driven straight from the New Haven courthouse, her robe still hanging in the back seat of her Subaru. At 32, she'd earned the kind of reputation most people respect, but few celebrate. Family court judge, precise, unflinching, and far too calm for a woman who'd seen what love can destroy. She watched her sister glide through the room, laughter trailing behind her like perfume. Joanna was radiant, 29, a public relations consultant who never met a mirror she couldn't charm. Her fiancé, Derek Keller, was a prosecutor from Hartford County, tall and composed, the kind of man who made people stand straighter when he walked in. Together they looked like an ad for everything Alexandra's life wasn't: romance, adventure, and effortless grace. The guests buzzed, uncles in tailored suits, cousins from Boston, and Derek's family from out of state. Even the mayor's wife had made an appearance. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the Armstrong daughter, who once again had landed perfectly on her feet. At the far end of the table, Joanna's mother, Nancy Armstrong, adjusted a vase. "Alexandra, sweetheart," she said, her voice sugar with a hint of vinegar. "Would you check the place cards?" Joanna wanted it to feel balanced. Of course she did. Alexandra murmured under her breath, aligning names she already knew were chosen to place her opposite her sister. Front row to the show. When the dinner bell chimed, the crowd moved into formation. Joanna floated to her seat in a scarlet dress that shimmered with every flicker of candlelight. Derek pulled out her chair like the gentleman he was. Alexandra sat down slowly, smoothing her slate-gray dress, simple and unremarkable, exactly how her mother preferred her to appear at family functions. The first toast rose, like ritual. Derek's brother lifted his glass, calling Joanna and Derek a match made in heaven. The guests clinked and cheered. Then Nancy followed, dabbing her eyes, praising Joanna's spirit, her resilience, her light. Every compliment felt like a deliberate omission. Nobody mentioned the sister who'd carried the family name through law school, who had spent her 20s in courthouses while Joanna toured Europe on their parents' dime. Alexandra smiled anyway. Years in court had taught her how to mask discomfort. Then came the first flicker, a spark too small for the room to notice. Joanna leaned over her champagne and said softly, "You look tired, Alex. Work's been hard, huh? Must be rough judging broken families all day." Her friends chuckled. Alexandra kept her voice measured. "It's meaningful work." "Sure," Joanna said, smirking. "You get to tell people how to live, without ever having one of your own." The words landed like a slap wrapped in satin. A few guests shifted, pretending to fix their napkins. Their father, Leonard Armstrong, cleared his throat. "Joanna." She waved him off. "Relax, Dad. Just teasing." Derek reached for her hand under the table, a silent warning. Joanna ignored it. Dinner resumed. Lamb with rosemary, honey-glazed carrots, fine wine that burned all the way down. Joanna performed effortlessly, guiding conversations, praising Derek, mocking small-town gossip. She was the kind of woman who could insult you and make you thank her for it. Halfway through dessert, Joanna raised her glass again. "To family," she said sweetly. "Especially my sister Alexandra, our resident Judge Judy. She keeps everyone else in line since she doesn't have a husband or kids to keep her busy." Laughter rippled, nervous, uneven. Alexandra's fork stilled midair. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't look up. Years of quiet endurance had built armor over her heart. Only Derek noticed the tremor in her hand. When the laughter faded, he turned to Joanna. "Enough." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone went quiet. Joanna blinked, startled. "I was kidding." "Were you?" Derek's eyes didn't leave hers. "You've made jokes for years, Joe, about her job, her life, her choices. Maybe it's time you stop." The silence after that was deafening. The violinist in the sunroom missed a note. Nancy laughed nervously. Let's not spoil the mood. Tonight is about love. But the mood had already changed. Every guest could feel it. Something trembling beneath the tablecloth, waiting to rise. Joanna forced a smile. But Derek didn't return it. He looked at Alexandra instead. Not accusing. Not pitying. Just steady. Maybe tonight is also about truth, he said. You're the judge tonight, Alex. Tell them what really happened 5 years ago. The words hung in the air like lightning, before a storm. Joanna's breath caught. Derek, don't. But he didn't look at her. The candles flickered. Someone dropped a spoon. The chandelier hummed. Alexandra lifted her eyes for the first time that evening, meeting her sisters across the candlelight. Her voice was soft. Are you sure you want me to? The room froze. Every guest, every glass, every lie suspended in that golden glow, and for the first time in her life, Joanna Armstrong's perfect smile faltered. The clink of silverware stopped. Even the quartet in the next room faltered mid-note before sliding into silence. The air in the dining room had turned thick, like the moment before a gavel drops. Joanna's smile twitched. Derek, what are you doing? She whispered, her voice honeyed but cracking around the edges. Derek didn't answer. His steady brown eyes never left Alexandra. You've been protecting her for years, he said quietly. Maybe tonight it's time she learns what truth feels like. The guests looked between them, uncertain, fascinated. Nobody dared move. Alexandra's throat tightened. 5 years of memories pressed against her chest, like iron. But beneath the weight, something shifted. A calm that only comes when a person has nothing left to lose. She set down her fork, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin, and stood. Candles flickered along the table as her shadow stretched across white linen. Everyone toasted the bride, she said evenly. Her voice low, deliberate, steady. Then she looked straight at Joanna. Until I told them what she did to her own daughter. A gasp cut through the room like glass breaking. Someone whispered, Daughter? Joanna's hand shot up. Alex. Sit down. You're drunk. I haven't had a sip all night, Alexandra replied. Her tone was surgical, the voice of someone used to unmasking lies in court. But maybe you should. You'll need it. Nancy Armstrong half rose from her chair. Girls. Not here. Where then, mother? Alexandra's eyes glinted in the candlelight. We've spent years pretending in this house. Maybe tonight we stop. Joanna's face paled. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Alexandra said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Quiet carried more power than anger ever could. 5 years ago, I got a call in the middle of the night. A motel off Route 34 in Hartford. You'd been missing for 2 days. When I found you, you were bleeding, bruised and too high to stand. And on that bed beside you was a little girl, 2 years old, with your eyes. The room went silent, but for the hum of the chandelier, even the candles seemed to hesitate. I brought that child home, Alexandra continued, bathed her, fed her, kept her safe, while you went to rehab. I gave her a room in my apartment. She called me Mama. For 6 months she was my world. Her voice cracked but didn't break. Then you showed up clean and smiling, said you wanted her back. I believed you, Joanna. I trusted you. I thought you'd changed. Across the table, Joanna's eyes glistened, not with remorse but fury. You're twisting everything. No, Alexandra said. You abandoned her again. You left her with a man who wasn't even her father. You collected child support for 3 years while she was in foster care. That's not twisting, that's truth. A gasp rippled through the guests. Nancy's hand flew to her mouth. Leonard Armstrong's face drained of color, his fork clattering onto the china plate. Derek pushed back his chair. I found the file, he said quietly. The state record, the payment receipts, the foster reports. Everything she just said is true. Joanna turned on him, her voice shrill. You had no right to dig into my past. Derek's expression didn't waver. You were going to marry me. I deserved to know who I was marrying. For the first time that night, the mask of charm shattered. Joanna's voice dropped into a trembling whisper. You don't understand. I was trying to fix things. By lying. Alexandra's tone was sharp but calm. By mocking me at your dinner table while your daughter sat in a state home thinking nobody wanted her. The guests sat frozen, torn between horror and fascination. Nobody looked away. The orchestra's silence had turned the whole house into a courtroom. Nancy's voice shook. A granddaughter. You mean there's a child? Leonard's jaw clenched. Is it true, Joanna? Joanna's lip trembled. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't raise a child alone. You didn't raise her at all. Alexandra said. You left her twice. Her words landed heavy, final, like verdicts. Then the bride's best friend, Demi Wilkinson, spoke softly from across the table. Joe, is that why you didn't want any children now? You told us it was for your career. Joanna's eyes flashed. Stay out of it, Demi. But it was too late. The room had turned against her. One guest quietly excused himself. Another whispered to his wife. The Armstrongs, who once prided themselves on being Old Haven's model family, were watching their perfect image crumble, like a sugar sculpture under heat. Nancy rose to her full height. Alexandra, this is not the place. You've humiliated your sister in front of everyone. Alexandra met her mother's eyes. She humiliated herself the moment she decided truth was optional. Leonard's voice was low. Nancy, sit down. But Joanna couldn't stop. She slammed her napkin onto the table. You've always wanted to be the hero, haven't you? The perfect daughter. You can't stand that people love me more. Alexandra blinked slowly. You mistake love for applause. The crowd fell utterly silent. Joanna's breathing grew ragged, fury rising in waves. You think you're better than me because you wear that robe and call yourself a judge. You're nothing without your title. And you're nothing without your lies. Alexandra replied softly. Derek's chair scraped the floor. I'm done, he said. I can't marry someone who abandons her child and mocks the woman who tried to save her. Joanna reached for him, desperate. Derek, please. He stepped back, shaking his head. You need help, not a husband. The silence that followed was unbearable. Guests began to stand, murmuring apologies, collecting coats. The quartet never played again that night. As the last outsider slipped through the door, only the Armstrong family remained, mother, father, 2 daughters, and a silence that felt centuries old. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the stained glass windows. Inside, the roses on the table began to wilt, their petals curling under the heat of shame. And for the first time in her life, Joanna Armstrong, the bride, the favorite, the untouchable, felt the sting of public humiliation. She wasn't the star anymore, she was the scandal. The house that had once glowed with laughter now hummed with the quiet rage of broken pride. The guests were gone. The front door stood slightly ajar, letting in a faint autumn breeze that carried away the scent of roses and wine. Only family remained. The Armstrongs, their voices reduced to whispers that trembled under the chandelier's fading light. Joanna sat slumped in her chair, her crimson dress rumpled, her makeup streaked like watercolor left in the rain. The perfect bride had been peeled back to the frightened woman beneath. Her mother, Nancy Armstrong, hovered beside her, torn between comfort and shame. Their father, Leonard, stood by the mantel, a man who'd built his life on keeping peace no matter the cost. And Alexandra, the elder sister, the quiet judge, stood at the head of the table, her face unreadable, her hands steady. You didn't have to do this here. Nancy whispered, clutching her pearls as if they could hold the family together. Yes, I did. Alexandra said evenly. For once, everyone needed to see what's real. Joanna lifted her head, her voice hoarse. You think you've saved me by destroying me? Alexandra looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. No. I think you destroyed yourself, the day you left your daughter behind. The words landed like stones in water, deep, echoing, impossible to retrieve. Leonard rubbed his temple. You both need to calm down. Calm? Alexandra's composure cracked, just slightly. Dad, do you have any idea what it felt like to find a child shivering on a motel bed, while her mother overdosed in the next room? To carry that baby out wrapped in my coat, because her own mother couldn't stand up. Joanna slammed her hands on the table. I was sick, I didn't plan it, I needed help. You had help, Alexandra said. You had me, and I gave up everything to make sure you were okay. Her voice softened, but only for a moment. I lost a pregnancy that year, Joanna. The surgery saved me, but it took away my chance to ever be a mother, and you knew that. You mocked me tonight anyway. The color drained from Joanna's face. For once, there was no quick retort, no performance, just silence. Nancy sank into her chair, eyes wide. You never told us that. I didn't tell anyone, Alexandra said, her tone flat. Because it wasn't about me, it was about keeping that little girl safe. Her name is Ava, she's 7 now. Leonard's voice broke through the hush. Ava? Alexandra nodded. The daughter you never knew you had. The granddaughter you've never met. Nancy gasped. Joanna? Joanna gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She was supposed to be with James, she said, her voice trembling. He said he could take care of her. Alexandra's brow furrowed. You mean James Duran? The man you met in rehab. Joanna nodded faintly. Leonard's voice hardened. You left your child with a stranger from rehab. He wasn't a stranger, Joanna cried. He said he loved us. Alexandra's voice sharpened. He wasn't her father. You collected child support from another man for 3 years while Ava sat in foster care. I have the records, Joanne. Derek found them. Joanna's face crumpled. I didn't know where she was. I thought she was with him. No, Alexandra cut in, her tone like steel. You stopped thinking, because thinking meant remembering what you'd done. For a moment no one spoke. The weight of the truth hung like smoke in the room. The gold-framed family portraits along the wall seemed to watch, silent witnesses to generations of pretense. Leonard finally spoke. Where is she now? With a foster family in New Haven, Alexandra replied. I've been visiting her for months. She's scared of loud voices. Flinches when someone reaches too fast. But she's smart, reads everything she can find. She's got Joanna's eyes, and every time she smiles. I remember that night at the motel. Nancy pressed her hand to her chest, trembling. We had a granddaughter all this time, Joanna whispered. You went behind my back. Alexandra's jaw tightened. No, Joanna. I went where you refused to go, to her. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence. Then Joanna stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. You've turned them all against me. Congratulations, Judge Armstrong. Leonard's voice rose, rare and firm. Sit down. But Joanna kept walking. You wanted me humiliated, you got it. I hope you're proud. Alexandra's eyes followed her. Proud? No, but I am done. Joanna stopped at the doorway, her shoulders trembling. You'll regret this. Alexandra's voice came soft, final. I already have, for 5 years. Joanna stormed out, the door slammed, echoing down the hall like a verdict. Nancy sat with her head in her hands. You shouldn't have done it this way. Maybe not, Alexandra said. But maybe this is the only way she'll finally face herself. Leonard crossed the room slowly. And what will you do now? Alexandra looked toward the window, where the wind swayed the lace curtains. I'm going to find Ava. Not as her aunt, but as the woman who won't let her be lost again. Outside, headlights flared as Joanna's car sped down the gravel drive, tail lights vanishing into the dark Connecticut night. Inside, the house remained still, heavy with truth, stripped of illusion. For the first time, the Armstrongs' perfect family portrait had cracked, and through the fracture reality had poured in like cold light. What none of them knew was that this dinner, this explosion was only the beginning. Because when a woman who has spent her life judging others finally steps into the courtroom of her own pain, she doesn't just seek justice. She becomes it. Days passed after the dinner like a slow-motion collapse. Joanna Armstrong's engagement was officially postponed. Guests whispered. Friends avoided her calls. The white roses from the dinner browned in their vases, a quiet symbol of decay. But in Alexandra Armstrong's small New Haven townhouse, something was stirring, not anger, not triumph, but resolve. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, brewed strong coffee, and spread out the files across her dining table. Birth certificates. Medical reports. Foster system records. Even the grainy photo of a little girl standing outside a group home in East Haven, holding a donated stuffed bear. Ava. Each night, that photo haunted her. The child she'd once tucked in. The child who'd reached for her hand and said, Mama, stay. She'd stayed all right, just on the other side of a legal line. Watching, visiting, waiting. But now the line had to move. She called an old colleague, Noah Kaufman, a fellow attorney she'd known since Yale Law. Calm, methodical, the kind of man who built cases like cathedrals. He listened quietly as she explained everything, from the motel to the foster files. When she finished, he said simply, Then we file for custody. And just like that, the judge became the petitioner. On a cold Monday morning, the courthouse smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The same marble halls Alexandra had walked for years now felt foreign, echoing differently beneath her heels. This time she wasn't presiding. She was pleading. In courtroom 3B, the clerk called the case. Armstrong versus Armstrong. Joanna sat at the respondent's table in a cream coat that was trying too hard to look pure. Her hair was perfect. Her smile rehearsed. Beside her sat her attorney, Charles Harper, a polished, sharp-tongued litigator, who loved the spotlight almost as much as Joanna once did. Behind them, Nancy and Leonard Armstrong sat stiff, their faces lined with exhaustion and denial. Derek Keller, the ex-fiancé, sat quietly in the back row. He wasn't required to be there, but he came anyway. When Alexandra walked in, the room seemed to shift, a familiar authority cloaked in quiet grief. She took her seat beside Noah. For once she wasn't wearing her black robe, just a navy dress and conviction. The judge, Evelyn Carter, gray-haired, respected and fair, adjusted her glasses. Let's begin. Noah stood first, voice steady. Your Honor, this case isn't about revenge, it's about a child. Ava Keller, who's been lost between paperwork, neglect, and deceit. My client cared for this child before her sister. The respondent reclaimed her and later abandoned her again. We're asking the court to place Ava permanently with my client, who has proven her stability, integrity, and bond with the child. He paused. This isn't punishment, it's protection. Charles Harper rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client made mistakes, yes, but she's rebuilt her life. She deserves a chance to repair her relationship with her daughter without interference. Judge Carter nodded. We'll hear the witnesses. Miller Sest first came Chioma Hayes. Ava's foster mother, a kind woman with soft eyes and steady words. When Ava first came to us, she barely spoke, she said. But after visits with Miss Armstrong, Alexandra, she started opening up. She'd draw pictures of them together. She said, Aunt Alex makes me feel safe. Charles cross-examined lightly, suggesting that Alexandra might be turning Ava against Joanna. Chioma shook her head. No sir, Miss Armstrong never speaks badly of her sister. She only tells Ava she's loved. Next, Derek Keller was called. His presence stirred the courtroom like a ripple. He adjusted his tie, looked at Joanna, then at the judge. I discovered Ava's existence while preparing marriage documents, he said. There were discrepancies in Joanna's financial records, child support deposits from an individual who wasn't the father. When I confronted her, she admitted it. She'd been collecting money and hadn't seen the child in years. Charles tried to spin it. Mr. Keller, isn't it true you have a personal grudge after the broken engagement? Derek's reply was calm. I didn't end our engagement because of a grudge. I ended it because of the truth. Joanna's face flushed crimson. Mine. It was Alexandra's turn to testify. The courtroom hushed. She spoke plainly, like someone who'd already lived her own sentencing. I found my sister in that motel room 5 years ago, she said. She was unconscious. The little girl was crying, hungry, terrified. I took them both in. When my sister went to rehab, I kept caring for the child. For 6 months, I was her guardian. I wasn't her mother by blood, but by love. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. Then I had a medical emergency, a ruptured cyst. The surgery saved my life, but left me unable to have children. When I woke up, my sister had taken Ava and disappeared. I tried to trust that she'd changed, but she hadn't. Judge Carter's face softened slightly. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because I wanted to believe family can fix itself. Alexandra said, but belief doesn't protect a child. Then came Joanna's performance. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, spoke of redemption and second chances, said she'd been lost, not cruel. She said she never meant to hurt anyone, but under questioning, her story unraveled. You collected child support while your daughter was in foster care, Judge Carter asked. Joanna hesitated. I was saving it for her. Do you have proof of that? Her lips parted, then closed again. No proof, no receipts. The judge's pen tapped against her pad. The last witness, Dr. Bennett, Ava's therapist, sealed the outcome. Every time Ava sees Miss Armstrong, her anxiety lowers. She calls her Mama Alex. Another separation would undo her progress. This child doesn't need another promise. She needs permanence. Silence. Then Judge Carter set down her pen. This court's duty is to the child, not the adults who failed her, she said. After reviewing testimony and evidence, I find that Miss Alexandra Armstrong has demonstrated consistent commitment to Ava's well-being. Miss Joanna Armstrong, however, has not. She looked over her glasses. Full custody of the minor child, Ava Keller, is hereby granted to Alexandra Armstrong, effective immediately. The respondent will repay misappropriated child support funds into a trust for Ava's future. Supervised visitation is allowed every other weekend, contingent upon counseling and compliance review in 6 months. The gavel struck once, a sound so final it felt holy. Joanna's body went rigid. "You can't do this," she cried, standing abruptly. Judge Carter's gaze was cool. "I just did." Outside the courtroom, Alexandra stepped into the crisp air. For the first time in years, she breathed fully. Noah clasped her shoulder. "You did it." She nodded. "No," she whispered, looking toward the gray sky. "We did it for her." Derek caught up, quiet, respectful. "Ava's lucky," he said. "She's not lucky," Alexandra replied. "She's finally home." Behind them, Joanna stumbled out of the courthouse doors, cameras flashing, reporters calling her name. The once envied bride turned scandal overnight. Her tears couldn't mask the truth anymore. She'd been exposed by the very woman she'd mocked. And in that cold gray light, justice looked nothing like vengeance. It looked like love standing its ground. Winter crept gently over New Haven that year. The courthouse headlines faded. The gossip circles moved on. But inside Alexandra Armstrong's small townhouse on Elm Street, something new was blooming. Something that made every judgment, every humiliation, every sleepless night worth it. It began with a knock on the door. When she opened it, a caseworker stood with a bundled little girl, whose eyes mirrored both sisters. A mix of fear and wonder. Ava Keller clutched a tiny suitcase, covered in stickers from a shelter drive. "Is this home?" she whispered. Alexandra knelt down, heart pounding. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "It's home, forever." That night, they unpacked together. One dress at a time, one fragile hope at a time. Alexandra had spent weeks preparing the room. The walls were painted the color of a morning sky. The shelves held children's books and a small music box shaped like a carousel. The quilt on the bed was stitched with careful patience, each square a promise that no one would leave again. Ava climbed onto the bed, hugging her new stuffed bear. "Do I have to go back?" she asked. "No," Alexandra said, brushing her hair aside. "You're safe now." The child smiled faintly, the first real smile Alexandra had seen since the courthouse. When the light clicked off, she stood in the doorway watching her sleep, this little soul she'd fought for through shame, courtroom whispers, and her sister's betrayal. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt earned. Weeks passed, then months. Healing came slowly, like the thaw after a long frost. Ava still woke from nightmares, sweating, trembling, calling for a mother who never came. Alexandra would rush in, wrap her arms around her, and whisper, "You're safe. I'm here." Every time, the words grew stronger. So did Ava. On Saturdays they walked to the park near Yale Green. Alexandra packed sandwiches and hot chocolate. Ava collected pine cones and told stories about clouds that looked like dragons. Neighbors waved. Some recognized Alexandra from the papers, the judge who adopted her sister's child. But no one dared gossip anymore. There was too much grace in the sight of them. A woman once mocked for being childless, and a girl who'd found the mother love had denied her. Nancy and Leonard Armstrong began visiting quietly on Sundays. They brought puzzles, crayons, and sometimes awkward apologies. The first time Ava called Leonard Grandpa, the old man's eyes filled before he could hide it. Nancy baked cookies and fussed about sugar levels, but every so often her voice cracked when she said Ava's name. For all their years of favoritism, they were learning slowly what real parenting looked like. Joanna never came. News traveled that she'd moved west, California maybe, and was taking time to heal. Her social media disappeared. Her name became a whisper in Connecticut society, once adored, now pitied. Every so often, Alexandra would find a letter in her mailbox, no return address, only shaky handwriting. The first few she opened, They were apologies that read more like excuses. She stopped opening them after that, because forgiveness, she'd learned, doesn't always require an audience. Sometimes peace just means letting silence answer. Niced 1. Evening in early spring, rain drummed softly against the window. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with crayons. She looked up suddenly. Mama, Alex? Yes, sweetheart. Are you a real judge? Alexandra smiled. Yes, I am. Ava tilted her head. Then how come you cry when you see me sleep? The question stole her breath. She knelt beside her daughter, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Because I almost lost you. And sometimes the heart remembers before the mind catches up. Ava thought for a moment, then handed her the drawing. 2 figures under a bright yellow sun, one tall in a black robe, one small with a red bow. At the top, in crooked letters, Ava had written, "My mom, the real judge." Alexandra's tears fell before she could stop them. She pulled the girl close, whispering, "I love you, Ava. I love you too, Mama," the child said softly. In that moment, every humiliation, every cruel dinner toast, every courtroom sting dissolved into quiet triumph. Months later, the Armstrong house in Old Haven went up for sale. Neighbors whispered that the family was downsizing, but those who knew better said the house had grown too heavy with memories. Alexandra drove by once with Ava asleep in the back seat. She didn't stop. Some ghosts don't deserve second chances. Instead, she took a right turn toward the park, where sunlight poured through maple trees. She parked, sat in the driver's seat, and let herself feel the weight of peace. Not the loud kind, not the headline kind, but the kind that hums quietly when justice has been done. Her revenge was never about ruining her sister's life. It was about saving a child's. And in the end, she'd done both, without raising her voice, without striking back. Just by telling the truth, and letting the world decide whose love was real. As the screen fades, the narrator's voice softens, age steady, full of knowing. Everyone toasted the bride that night, raising glasses to charm and beauty. But when the candles dimmed and the truth stood bare, they learned that not all victories are loud. Some come quietly, in bedtime stories, in steady hands, in the sound of a child whispering mamas in the dark. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears love.